Hey, welcome to Sleepy Old World. If you are new here, I am so glad you found your way in. Tonight, we're going somewhere that is both very close and surprisingly far away. We're going to an office building on Madison Avenue in New York City in the year 1958. 14th floor, a room full of typewriters and the particular smell of carbon paper and Aquanet hairspray. And in that room, there was a set of rules, unspoken, unwritten, never posted on any bulletin board, that every woman who worked there knew by heart. Rules that shaped every hour of every day. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let us go back. Picture this. It is a Wednesday morning in October 1958. The sky over Midtown Manhattan is the flat grey of old wool, the kind of sky that never quite decides whether it's going to rain. On the sidewalk below, the city is already moving. Taxis cutting through the morning chill, newspaper vendors on their corners, steam rising from grates in the pavement in slow, lazy curls. The sound of all of it rises 14 floors and reaches Beverly through a window that does not open. Beverly is 27 years old. She's walking from the elevator to her desk, and she's doing it in a particular way. Not quickly, not lazily, but at a precise and deliberate pace that communicates busy competence without the distasteful suggestion of urgency. Her heels make a soft, steady sound on the tile floor. Her posture is straight. Not stiffly straight, not military straight, but the kind of straight that looks natural and effortless because she has practiced it since she was 16 years old and has not stopped since. She's wearing a navy blue wool skirt that falls exactly to mid-calf, a white blouse with a Peter Pan collar, a small pearl brooch at the neckline. Her hair is set. She went to the salon on Saturday, as she does every Saturday without exception, and the waves are still holding beautifully on this Wednesday, which is something she's quietly proud of because it has been a damp week. Her shoes are navy, low-heeled, polished to a mild shine. Her stockings are seamless, beige, and entirely without flaw. This last detail matters more than you might think. Beverly sets her handbag down beside her chair, removes her white cotton gloves, then she sits, straightens a stack of folders that was already straight, and positions her fingers above the keys of her typewriter. The day has begun, and Beverly is already, without thinking about it, following rules that no one ever wrote down. This is the thing about the unspoken rules of working women in the 1950s. They were not in any manual, they were not covered in training. No supervisor sat you down and said, "Here is how this works." You absorbed them the way you absorb every important thing when you are young and paying careful attention to the world around you. Through watching, through the subtle social correction of a glance or a pause or a slight, almost imperceptible shift in the room's temperature when you did something wrong. They were rules about appearance, about behaviour, about voice and timing, and the precise management of your own ambition in a world that was not sure whether your ambition was charming or threatening, and tended to assume the latter. Tonight, we are going to follow Beverly through her day, through the whole shape of a Wednesday in 1958, from the moment her alarm clock rings in her apartment in Murray Hill to the moment she takes off her shoes at the end of it. We are going to see the rules she followed, all of them, the obvious ones and the ones so subtle they barely registered as rules at all. And we are going to understand what those rules cost, and what they made possible, and what they say about a world that feels, depending on the moment, like either a very long time ago or not quite long enough. So, let us begin at the beginning. Beverly wakes up at 6:15, not because her alarm is set for 6:15, though it is, because she woke up at 6:11, as she nearly always does, lying in the half-dark of her apartment bedroom listening to the city outside begin its slow noise, and decided it was close enough. The apartment is small by any standard that is not 1958 Manhattan. A single bedroom, a living room narrow enough that you could touch both walls if you stretched your arms, a kitchen she can traverse in 4 steps. The bathroom has a window that looks onto a brick wall, and she has placed a small African violet on the sill because the light is surprisingly good there, and because the violet is something alive in a room without much colour. She likes it more than she probably should. The first rule of Beverly's morning is one she would never identify as a rule. It is simply what you do. You do not leave the house until you're completely put together, not mostly put together, not put together enough for a quick errand. Completely. This takes, on a typical morning, approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. Beverly has timed this. She has to have. Because the math of getting from her apartment on 33rd Street to her desk on the 14th floor of an office building on Madison Avenue by 8:45, using the Lexington Avenue subway and a 3-block walk, requires a specific departure time, and she is not the kind of woman who is late. She washes her face with Pond's cold cream, working it in small circles the way her mother taught her, then wipes it away with a warm, damp cloth. She applies Pond's vanishing cream afterward, lighter for daytime, patting it gently along the jawline and around the eyes without pulling at the skin, because pulling at the skin causes lines, and lines at 27 must be anticipated and prevented rather than treated. This is not vanity, not exactly. It is maintenance. It is the same reasonable attention a person gives to a car they depend on. Foundation next. She has 2 shades, one for summer, slightly warmer, one for autumn and winter, which is what she's using now. She applies it with a small damp sponge, blending carefully into the hairline and along the jaw so there is no visible edge. Pressed powder over that, from a compact she keeps on the left side of the vanity tray because she's left-handed. A small puff, a light press across the forehead and chin, and the skin is set. Now the eyes. Brown pencil along the upper lid, smudged slightly to soften it. A brush of brown mascara. She uses a cake mascara with a tiny brush, wetting it first with a drop of water from the tap, because the tube kind can clump, and clumping is the sort of thing people notice even when they pretend not to. She does not use eyeshadow for work. That is an evening thing. In an office, eyeshadow reads as forward, and forward is not what Beverly is going for. The lipstick. This is, if you had to pick one thing, the most important step in the entire routine. Not because Beverly is particularly attached to it, she's fairly neutral on the subject of lipstick in the abstract, but because of what it communicates, which is that you have made an effort, that you are presenting yourself as polished and intentional, that you understand the standards. The shade she's using today is called Rose Coral by Revlon. She's applied it with a small brush first, working carefully around the Cupid's bow, filling in toward the centre. Then she presses her lips to a folded square of tissue to blot the excess and applies a second coat. The result is a clean, even colour that will last through the morning commute, through the first 2 hours of typing, and through the coffee she drinks at her desk. She knows that after lunch she will need to reapply it. This is not a question. This is simply the way things are. Her hair, as we said, is already done. Saturday's set still holding on Wednesday, which requires sleeping on a particular kind of satin pillowcase and not moving too dramatically in the night, which Beverly has gotten very good at. She pins a stray wave back into place with a single bobby pin, smooths the sides with a small comb, and assesses the result in the mirror for a few seconds. She decides it is fine. Then the girdle. If you're of a certain age, you know exactly what I am talking about. If you are younger, let me describe it for you. The girdle was a foundation garment, a tight elasticized undergarment that covered the body from approximately the waist to mid-thigh, designed to smooth and compress and present what the period considered a correct silhouette. Every woman Beverly worked with wore one. Every woman Beverly knew wore one. It was not optional in any practical sense. Not because anyone would have said you cannot come to this office without a girdle, but because the alternative was visible, and what was visible was judged, and what was judged affected everything. Beverly steps into hers without particular thought, the way you step into something you have done every single morning for 9 years. Pulls it up, adjusts, the elastic catches slightly at the hip, and she smooths it down with the flat of her hand. Then her stockings, attached to the girdle's garter straps. She has to sit on the edge of the bed to hook these properly, and she does so without rushing, because rushing leads to runs, and runs are the kind of visible disaster that requires a visit to the ladies' room first thing. Skirt, blouse, brooch. The pearl brooch was her grandmother's, which is something she thinks about briefly every time she pins it on. Her grandmother would not have known what to make of the 14th floor of a Madison Avenue advertising firm, but she would have approved, Beverly thinks, of the brooch placement. Shoes last. A small spray of RPG on each wrist, not behind the ears, the wrists, because she read somewhere that it lasts longer there. She cannot remember now where she read it, but she has been doing it for 4 years, so she is ready. She picks up her handbag, her white cotton gloves, and her navy coat from the hook by the door, and she steps into the hallway of her building at 7:22 in the morning. The subway is its own ordeal, but an ordinary one. Beverly stands for the full ride, which takes approximately 18 minutes on a good day, holding the strap with one gloved hand and keeping her other arm pressed close to her side so her coat does not pick up whatever is on the person next to her. She keeps her face neutral. This is also a rule. Not one anyone stated, but one every woman on the train understands. You do not look available for conversation. Not on the morning subway. Not unless you want to receive conversation of a particular kind that will require managing carefully and will make you late. She exits at 51st Street and walks the 3 blocks to the building without hurrying, despite the cold, because arriving breathless and wind disordered is worse than arriving 1 minute late. She stops once at the newsstand on the corner to pick up a copy of the New Yorker, not for now, for her lunch break, and exchanges a brief pleasant nod with the vendor who has seen her every weekday morning for the past 2 years, and whose name she has somehow never learned. She goes in through the revolving door, crosses the lobby marble, takes the elevator to 14. The elevator. There are rules here too, though Beverly would not call them that. She would call them simply manners, or perhaps instinct. When the elevator is occupied by men she does not know, which it usually is, she positions herself near the back, does not speak unless spoken to, and says good morning when she is spoken to in a tone that is warm but not warm in a way that could be misinterpreted. There are men in this building who would misinterpret it. She knows which ones they are. She has known since her 2nd week. The elevator doors open on 14 and Beverly steps out into the particular atmosphere of the typing pool. It is, when you first encounter it, a remarkable room. 22 desks arranged in 4 rows, each with a typewriter, each with a small inbox tray on the right side and an outbox tray on the left. The desks are identical. The chairs are identical. Along the far wall, a row of tall metal filing cabinets in battleship grey. On the back wall, a clock with a face about the size of a dinner plate, the second hand moving with a small precise tick that Beverly can hear when the room goes quiet. The room never quite goes quiet between 8:45 and 5:30. The sound of 22 typewriters going at different speeds and rhythms is something you either get used to or you do not, and the women who work here have gotten used to it. It is the sound of work being done. There is something satisfying in it if you listen right. Beverly hangs her coat, stores her bag, and settles in. At 8:50, Doris arrives at the desk 2 rows over. Doris is 31, has worked in this building for 5 years, and is widely considered the fastest typist on the floor, something like 92 words per minute with almost no errors, which is a genuinely uncommon skill. Doris wears red today, a dark red wool dress with a wide black belt, and her hair is freshly done in a style that is slightly more elaborate than Beverly's. They exchange a brief fond look across the rows of desks. This is not the time for conversation, not yet. The morning mail is distributed by a young man named Robert, who is 22 and has the kind of easy confidence that 22-year-old men working in offices in 1958 are permitted to have. He drops a manila envelope on Beverly's desk without looking at her, which Beverly does not take personally because it is simply how the mail gets distributed. She opens the envelope, reads the first memo, and begins to type. She is very good at this, faster than she lets on. This is a rule of its own, and one of the more interesting ones. You did not want to be visibly the best at typing, or rather, you wanted to be competent, demonstrably competent, indispensably competent, but not so demonstrably excellent that the men in the glass offices along the far side of the floor started to feel their own performance questioned by contrast. There was a speed, a level of output, a kind of quiet thoroughness that kept you valued without making anyone uncomfortable. Beverly understood this by the end of her first month and had calibrated accordingly. Doris understood it too, which is why Doris's typing speed had been known on this floor for several years and was treated as a charming talent rather than a professional achievement. 92 words per minute, and she would be there until she retired, or until she married someone who could afford to support her on his salary alone. Both of them knew this. Neither of them said so. At 9:15, a buzzer sounds near the door of the main office at the end of the room, where Mr. Hargrove sits. Hargrove is the account supervisor, 53 years old, grey suit, Camel cigarettes. The particular manner of a man who has never had to consider how he comes across because the world has always been arranged in his favour. He is not cruel. This is important to say. He is not a villain. He is simply the product of an environment that has told him every day of his adult life that certain things are simply the way things are. The buzzer means he needs something, and here is a rule that requires careful explanation, because it is one of the more revealing ones. The coffee on every morning, and at various points throughout the afternoon, someone brings Mr. Hargrove his coffee. He does not request it. He does not pick up the phone and ask. The buzzer goes, or he simply appears in the doorway, and whoever is nearest the percolator, which is always, somehow, a woman, brings it. The coffee is kept on a table near the far wall. The percolator is brown with a chrome top, and it runs all day. There are cups in the cabinet above it, a small cream pitcher that is refilled from the kitchen down the hall, a sugar bowl, a box of paper napkins. When you bring coffee to someone above you in the hierarchy, you bring it with the napkin folded under the cup. You bring it without being asked. You bring it with the kind of natural, easy grace that communicates that this is simply something you are happy to do, not because it is in your job description. It is not in anyone's job description. It is not in any document anywhere in the building, but because it is the kind of thing that is simply done. Beverly has brought Mr. Hargrove his coffee approximately, she has not counted, but it is approximately 340 times in the 2.5 years she has worked on this floor. She has never been thanked, not in a formal or explicit way. What she has received, which is perhaps more valuable in the context of 1958, is the steady impression that she is considered pleasant and capable, which is the currency that keeps you employed in a typing pool when there are 100 other women who could do the same job. This is the calculus, and Beverly understands it. She does not like it exactly, but she understands it the way you understand weather as a condition you navigate rather than a policy you debate. On this particular Wednesday, the buzzer goes at 9:15 and Beverly is the one who is nearest. She goes to the percolator, pours, adds 2 sugars and no cream, which she knows from repetition, places the napkin and carries the cup across the room and into the office. Mr. Hargrove is on the telephone. He does not look up. Beverly sets the cup on the coaster at the right side of his desk. There is a specific coaster. There is always a specific coaster. And withdraws. The door closes behind her with the faintest sound. She returns to her desk and continues typing. The morning moves with the particular rhythm that Tuesday through Thursday mornings always have. A rhythm that Beverly finds genuinely quite pleasant. There is something in the predictability of it that she would have difficulty explaining to someone outside of it. The regular percussion of the typewriter keys, the soft rustle of paper being rolled in and out of the platen, the occasional sound of someone opening and closing a file drawer, The smell of the cigarette that someone 2 rows over is smoking at her desk. Smoking is permitted at the desks, and several of the women do it, though Beverly is not among them, not in the morning, and not usually at work, because smoke in your hair is a problem she has enough variables without adding. At 10:30 there is a brief pause. Not a formal break, nothing is announced as a formal break, but the pace slows slightly, the way water slows in a wide place in a river, and several women stand to stretch or visit the percolator or exchange a few quiet words. This is when Beverly and Doris get their 3 minutes. New dress, Beverly says, which is not exactly a question. Sears, Doris says, which is the entire explanation. She smooths the black belt with one hand in a gesture that Beverly recognizes as not vanity but satisfaction. $4.99. It looks like $12. That is the goal. This is a rule too in its way. The economics of working women's clothing in 1958 were careful and precise and known to everyone in the room. You were expected to look a certain way, put together, appropriate, reflecting a standard of presentation that communicated professional respectability, and you were expected to achieve this on a salary that made it genuinely difficult. Department store credit accounts helped. Careful sewing helped if you had the time and the skill. Watching for sales helped. Knowing the difference between what looked expensive and what was expensive was a skill Beverly considered genuinely underrated, because it was in fact quite a sophisticated one. Doris had it. Beverly had it. They had all developed it the way you develop any skill that is necessary for survival in a particular environment. The 10:30 lull lasts perhaps 4 minutes, and then the rhythm resumes. At 11:15, Beverly makes an error, not a large error. She has transposed 2 letters in the middle of a sentence. From has become form, and she does not notice it until she has typed 3 more lines. She stops, considers, decides. There is correction fluid in the top drawer. She pulls it out, blows on the roller gently to position the error under the white brush, applies a thin coat, waits the prescribed 15 seconds for it to dry, and then types the correct letter over it. The finished product, if you did not know where to look, would be impossible to identify as a correction. Beverly has very high standards for her work. This is true. It is also true that the stakes of an error in a typed document in 1958 are different from the stakes in a world with backspace keys. A typo that goes to a client is a typo that your supervisor knows about, and a supervisor who knows about your typos is a supervisor who might think twice the next time someone asks his opinion of your capabilities. So, the correction fluid is always in the top drawer, and the 15 seconds of drying time is always observed, and Beverly has not sent a document with an uncorrected error in 2.5 years. She is proud of this in a way she would not know how to articulate out loud. In a room where so much of what she achieves is invisible, not because it is bad, but because perfect invisible work is what is expected, this particular standard is her own. There is a knock at 11:40. One of the glass office doors opens, and a man Beverly does not recognize well. She thinks he is from the 3rd floor, something in client relations, comes into the room, glances around, and says to the room at large, in the way that certain men in that decade spoke to rooms containing women, "Can someone pull the Morrison file for me?" Beverly, who knows exactly where the Morrison file is because she filed it herself 3 days ago, is already out of her seat before she has consciously decided to stand. She goes to the filing cabinet, opens the 3rd drawer, retrieves the correct folder, and brings it to him. He takes it without quite looking at her. "Thanks, sweetheart." Beverly returns to her desk and resumes typing. She does not want to be called sweetheart. This is perhaps the clearest and most obvious thing I can tell you about Beverly. She does not like it. She has never liked it. The first time it happened, in her first week on this floor, she felt a flush of something sharp and complicated move through her that she could not entirely name, though she recognized it. But here is the rule. You do not say so. You do not correct. You do not demonstrate irritation in any visible way, because visible irritation in a woman in 1958 is not interpreted as a reasonable response to something imprecise and slightly condescending. It is interpreted as the woman being difficult, and a difficult woman is a woman who is a problem, and a woman who is a problem is a woman who is, eventually, for reasons that are never quite stated directly, simply not here anymore. So Beverly says nothing, and the man from the third floor takes the Morrison file and goes, and the room is the same as it was before, and at 11:45 the clock's second hand makes its small tick, and Beverly's fingers find the keys again. Noon arrives. Lunch at the building is a carefully negotiated social event, which sounds absurd if you have never operated inside it, but makes perfect sense if you have. There is a lunchroom on the 12th floor. Long tables, metal chairs, a small window with a view of the building across the street, and there are, informally and without anyone having designed it this way, social territories within it. The men from the accounts department eat at the near tables. The women from the typing pool eat at the windows. The women from the front office, who are fewer in number and hold slightly different positions, the executive secretaries as distinct from the typing pool, eat near the coffee station, which is a position of very minor prestige that everyone pretends not to have noticed. Beverly and Doris eat at the window table on most days, along with Helen, who is 29, and has the particular gift of making any room feel slightly warmer than it was before she entered it. Today there is also Carol, who is filling in from the 7th floor because someone up there is out sick, and who is eating a tuna salad sandwich with a composure Beverly admires, because tuna in a lunchroom is a commitment. The conversation at lunch is very good. This is one of the genuine pleasures of Beverly's day, and she does not take it lightly. The women she works with are by and large extraordinarily funny, observant, and intellectually alive, and when they are together at this table with an hour and no typewriters, something different happens. The pace changes, opinions are stated. There is occasionally a joke that makes Beverly laugh so suddenly and fully that she has to cover her mouth. But even here there are rules. Certain subjects do not come up at this table, not because they are forbidden, but because they are understood to be unfavorable. You do not discuss your salary in a way that might reveal what other women are earning, because the numbers are different, sometimes remarkably different, for women doing essentially the same work, and the discomfort that comes from knowing this is not useful and cannot be addressed, so it is simply not examined. You do not speak loudly about anything that might carry to the men's tables, not because you are hiding your opinions, but because a woman who is overheard expressing strong opinions about the way things are run is a woman who is marked, and being marked is not something you arrange for yourself carelessly. You do not cry at work. This one Beverly would name as a rule without hesitation. You simply do not. It is not about weakness or strength. It is a practical reality that tears in a woman at work in 1958 are not received the way tears in a man would theoretically be received, which is to say with the gravity of a serious emotional event. They are received instead as evidence of a particular kind of instability, of not quite being suited for the professional environment, of being the word that shadows everything, emotional. And once that word attaches to you, it is very difficult to remove. So you do not cry. You learn instead to have what Beverly privately thinks of as a very long fuse. You feel what you feel, and you are very precise about when and how and to whom you show it. At the window table at noon, surrounded by Doris and Helen and occasional Carol with her tuna sandwich, you can let a little of the tension out. You can say in a low voice with a look that communicates exactly what you mean, "He called the report incomplete," and the way Helen says "which report," with a specific flatness in her voice, tells you that she already knows everything you are not saying and is on your side, and this small, daily, largely invisible solidarity is one of the things that keeps the whole arrangement working. At 12:55, Beverly opens her New Yorker and reads a story about a man traveling in Spain, which is very good and which she will still be thinking about on Thursday. She finishes her coffee, which she brought down from the lunchroom in a paper cup and has been drinking slowly for the last 20 minutes. She is the kind of person who always brings a book or a magazine to lunch and always feels slightly grateful to herself for remembering. At 1 o'clock exactly, she closes the magazine, stands, straightens her skirt, checks the left side of her blouse where a small pleat can sometimes come untucked, and goes to the ladies' room. The ladies' room on the 14th floor is a significant social space in a way that sounds, I know, ridiculous if you say it quickly, but it is. It is the one room in the building where only women go, and this makes it, in the context of 1958, something closer to neutral territory than anywhere else on the floor. You can say things in the ladies' room that you would not say at your desk or in the lunchroom, not radical things, not things you would be embarrassed by later, but real things, true things, the kind of observations that require a room with a closed door and no men. Beverly goes to the mirror, sets her handbag on the narrow shelf below it, and takes out her lipstick. The reapplication of lipstick after lunch is one of those rules that sits at the exact intersection of the practical and the symbolic, and I want to spend a moment with it because I think it is more interesting than it appears. The practical element is straightforward. You have eaten, and food removes lipstick, and arriving back to your desk with no lipstick on would communicate that you could not be bothered with the afternoon the way you could be bothered with the morning, and that communicates something about your standards that you do not want communicated. But there is something else in it too. The act of standing in front of a mirror at 1 o'clock and carefully reapplying a specific colour, rose coral, Revlon, same as this morning, is an act of reconstitution. You have had an hour of being relatively yourself. You have laughed at Helen's joke and read your magazine and eaten half a cheese sandwich, and now you are putting the professional face back on, deliberately, consciously, with a small brush and a steady hand, and going back out. Beverly finds this less depressing than it might sound. She has a slightly different relationship to the morning ritual and the afternoon reconstitution than a person looking back from outside the era might expect. There is, in the very dailiness of these acts, a kind of quiet competence that she genuinely values. She is good at this, she is good at getting it right. In an environment where she has very little formal power, there is a particular satisfaction in doing the thing you can control with precision and care. She presses her lips together. Perfect. Doris is at the next mirror, fixing a pin that has slipped slightly in her hair. Carol is washing her hands with the careful, deliberate way of someone who wants to stay in the ladies' room for a few extra seconds. "Did Hargrove say anything to you about the Bristol account?" Doris says to the mirror, not looking directly at Beverly, because looking directly at someone in the ladies' room mirror is a specific thing that requires deciding to do. "Not directly," Beverly says. "He asked me yesterday whether the correspondence file was complete," Doris says. "I told him it was. He seemed surprised." The three of them absorb this quietly. "Why would he be surprised?" Carol says, not as a question. There is a brief, complete silence, and then Helen pushes the door open with the back of her hand, already pulling a pin from her hair with the other, and says Hargrove is surprised by anything that is not going wrong, in a very dry voice, and the silence breaks, and Beverly is laughing again before she can stop herself, the quick kind that she catches with the back of her hand. She is still smiling when she walks back out onto the floor. The afternoon has its own rhythm, different from the morning. The pace is slightly less urgent. The morning's deadlines are met, and the afternoon ones are in progress but not yet pressing. The light through the windows shifts. The cigarette smoke from the men's offices drifts more freely now, coming under the connecting door in thin ribbons. The sound of the percolator beginning to cycle again at 2 o'clock. Someone has made a fresh pot, and the familiar smell of it moving through the room. Beverly is working on a long document this afternoon. 40 pages of correspondence for the Caldwell account, which needs to be sorted, cross-referenced, and filed in a specific order that has been written on a slip of paper and tucked into her top drawer. She works steadily. Her fingers on the keys move with a rhythm that is by now almost unconscious. Her hands know where the letters are without her directing them, the way a pianist's hands know a piece they have played 10,000 times. At 2:30, Mr. Hargrove comes out of his office. He comes out into the typing pool perhaps 3 times in an average week. He prefers to buzz or to have one of the women come to him, which is itself a small but consistent statement about how he understands the spatial hierarchy of the floor. But occasionally he emerges, usually when something needs to be communicated to the room in general, and when he does, the room does a thing that Beverly has always found interesting to observe. It adjusts without comment, without any visible sign of adjustment, but adjusts nonetheless. Spines straighten slightly. The rate of typing increases almost imperceptibly. The room becomes, by about 8%, more officially itself. Hargrove stops in the middle of the floor. He is holding a file. He says, "To the room rather than to anyone specific. The Whitmore proposal needs to be retyped, the client version. Someone told them it would be ready by 4. There is a fraction of a second of perfect stillness. Beverly does the math in her head. The Whitmore proposal is 14 pages. 14 pages at her regular pace takes approximately 40 minutes. It is currently 2:32. 4 o'clock is an hour and 28 minutes away. She lifts her hand, not dramatically, just raises it. The kind of small controlled gesture that says, "I will do this," without saying it, with more energy than the task requires. "Beverly," Hargrove says, with the kind of nod that means yes and good, and also "I will not think about this again." He goes back into the office. The door closes. The room resumes. Beverly pulls the Whitmore file from the pile of things she was not doing today, sets aside the Caldwell correspondence without looking regretful about it, rolls in a fresh sheet of paper and begins. She finishes the Whitmore proposal at 3:48, which gives her 12 minutes to check it before the messenger comes for it at 4. She checks it twice, once for errors, once for formatting, making sure the margins are consistent and the page numbers are in the correct position. She finds one transposed digit in the client's telephone number, corrects it with the fluid, waits for it to dry. Then she removes the document from the typewriter, straightens the pages and clips them together with a paper clip. Not a rubber band, never a rubber band on clients' documents because rubber bands leave marks, and places the document in the outbox. At 4 o'clock she takes a small breath. The afternoon, at this point, takes on the particular quality that late afternoons have when the pressure of the day has begun to ease and you are not quite ready to think about the evening yet. The light through the windows is starting to turn, not sunset yet, not in October, but the quality of it is different, slightly more slanted, slightly more golden, and Beverly notices it the way she always notices it, because the light is one of those things that the 14th floor gives you that you would not have expected. Helen stops by Beverly's desk at 4:15. She is carrying a cup of coffee that she has made herself, not for anyone else, for herself, which is also a rule, or a non-rule. You could make coffee for yourself. Of course you could. But you were aware at all times of whether there was a more senior person in the room without coffee, and you made a reading of whether obtaining your own coffee first would be noted. Helen has done the reading and determined that it is safe, and she stops at Beverly's desk, sets her cup down on the side of the desk where there is no document in progress, and stands for a moment in the way that signals I have something to say but nothing urgent. They posted the announcement this morning, Helen says. Beverly waits. Junior account coordinator, 3rd floor. Beverly knows about this position. She has known about it for 3 weeks, since she overheard it mentioned in a conversation between 2 men in the elevator, a conversation they were having with the unconcerned volume of people who do not expect to be overheard by anyone who matters. The position is new. It is a rung above the typing pool. It involves contact with clients, with accounts, with the work itself in a more direct way than typing correspondence allows. Did it go in the women's section? Beverly says. Helen gives her a look over the rim of the coffee cup. No, it did not go in the women's section. The employment advertisements in New York newspapers in 1958 were divided into 2 sections, Help Wanted Male and Help Wanted Female. The Help Wanted Male section contained positions in management, sales, accounts, coordination. The Help Wanted Female section contained positions for secretaries, typists, receptionists, and similar roles. This was not, as I mentioned at the beginning, considered illegal. It was considered an accurate description of the relevant categories. The junior account coordinator, which Beverly has the skills and the experience and the intelligence to do without a question in anyone's mind, including, if she is being honest, Hargrove's, was posted in Help Wanted Male. Tommy Ferris is applying, Helen says. Tommy Ferris is 24 years old and has been on the 3rd floor for 7 months. Beverly looks at her typewriter. She looks at the outbox where the Whitmore proposal is sitting in its neat clip, ready to go. She thinks about the phone number she caught. About 14 pages in 40 minutes. About 340 cups of coffee approximately that she has carried across a room and set on a coaster without being thanked. Good for Tommy, she says, and she means it and does not mean it in the same breath, and she suspects Helen understands exactly what that sounds like, because Helen says nothing and simply stands there for another moment holding her coffee, and the two of them look out at the October light coming through the tall windows. It is a quietly complex moment. Not tragic, not melodramatic, just real. At 5:15, Beverly begins the small ceremony of closing down the day. She removes the last document from the typewriter. She covers the machine with its fitted cloth cover. Not everyone does this, but Beverly does, because a typewriter with dust on it is a typewriter that jams, and a typewriter that jams is a delay you do not have room for. She straightens her inbox and outbox, files 2 remaining folders in the cabinet where they belong, retrieves her white cotton gloves from her handbag, and begins the specific process of reassembling herself for the outside world. This is the reverse of the morning in some ways, but also its own thing. The morning reassembly is about putting on. The end-of-day version is about transitioning from the particular persona the office requires back towards something more privately herself, though the transformation is never quite complete, not in public. Not until she is home. She checks her lipstick in the small mirror she keeps in the side pocket of her bag. Still acceptable. She will not reapply. It is nearly evening, and the rules of lipstick reapplication are slightly different for the commute home versus the workday, a distinction she has never tried to explain to anyone outside of herself, but which makes complete sense to her. She puts on her coat. She puts on her gloves. She takes her handbag and her New Yorker, which she will finish on the subway, and she goes to the elevator. In the elevator, going down, there are 2 men she does not know having a conversation about a baseball game. She does not insert herself into this conversation. She stands slightly to the side, holds her bag with both hands, and looks at the numbers above the door as they descend. When the lobby floor lights up, she says "excuse me" quietly to navigate around the closer man, and he steps aside without interrupting his sentence, and she goes through the lobby and out through the revolving door, and into the October street. The cold hits her cleanly. The sky has gone that deep blue that October evenings do, the kind that seems backlit, the kind that makes even Midtown Manhattan look briefly atmospheric. She stands for a moment on the sidewalk, just a breath of it, and then she turns and walks to the subway. The commute home is different from the commute there. On the way to work, the energy is forward-facing. There is a destination, a role, a set of expectations you are moving toward. On the way home, the tension is releasing in slow stages, like a held breath going out, and Beverly can feel it in her shoulders, the slight downward shift of muscles that have been held at a professional readiness all day. She reads the rest of the New Yorker story about Spain. The man in the story finds himself in a small village during a festival and spends the night in a tavern listening to music he does not understand but finds beautiful. Beverly finishes the story just as the train pulls into 33rd Street, and she folds the magazine under her arm and goes up the stairs and into the Murray Hill evening. At home, the apartment is exactly as she left it in the morning, which is to say clean and orderly and entirely hers, which is something she finds deeply restoring. Beverly lives alone. This is in 1958 a notable fact. Most women her age are married, and married to men who earn the household income, and living in houses in the suburbs of the city with children and a great deal more square footage and a great deal less of the thing Beverly values about the apartment on 33rd Street, which is the quality of the silence when the door closes behind her. She is not lonely. She has been lonely in her life, has known what that feels like, and this is not it. She has Helen and Doris and a friend named Margaret, who works in publishing and with whom she has dinner every other Thursday. She has her parents in Queens and a younger brother at the City University of New York. She has the African violet and the Saturday trip to the salon, and a very good butcher on 2nd Avenue and the New Yorker every week. She would tell you if you asked, a life. Not the expected one, not the one that the women's magazines would have drawn for a 27-year-old, but a life she has chosen more or less within the considerable limits of what choosing means for a woman of her particular moment. The first thing she does when she comes home is take off her shoes. This is the great unclenching, the signal to her body that the day's requirements are over, and her feet spread slightly on the cool wood floor in the way they never can in the low-heeled navy shoes, and she stands for a moment in her stockinged feet and allows herself this small, disproportionate pleasure. Then the girdle. She unclips the garter straps, rolls each stocking down carefully and drapes them over the towel bar in the bathroom to air out before washing them. You washed them every evening by hand with gentle soap, hanging them to dry overnight so they would be ready by morning, because stockings ran if they were not handled with care, and stockings were not free. Then she steps out of the girdle and sets it aside and breathes, actually breathes, the full breath that the compression has been moderating all day, and feels her body return to itself. She changes into a house dress, which is a garment of an entirely different energy from the navy wool skirt and the white blouse. Cotton, loose, faded cornflower blue, worn to the precise softness that only comes from years of washing. She bought it at Allbucks 3 years ago for $1.49, and it is the most comfortable piece of clothing she owns, and she cannot wear it anywhere that anyone will see her, which makes it perversely something she appreciates even more. She makes her dinner. Beverly is a competent, uncomplicated cook who makes food she likes with the ingredients she has, which in 1958 means a great deal of meat, a great deal of canned vegetables, and a relationship with Campbell's soup that she does not think about too carefully. Tonight she has a pork chop she bought yesterday, which she seasons with salt and a little rosemary, or she thinks it's rosemary. She bought a new jar, and the label has worn, and pan fries in the cast-iron skillet that was her mother's, and that she has moved to 2 apartments without once thinking of leaving behind. She has canned green beans, heated in a small saucepan. She has bread from the bakery on 2nd Avenue, sliced and buttered. She eats at her small kitchen table with the New Yorker open to an article about something in Europe, and she eats slowly because she has the whole evening and there is nowhere to be. After dinner she washes up, which takes approximately 8 minutes, and then she sits in the living room in the thin cushioned armchair that she considers the best piece of furniture she owns, and she thinks about the day. This is a habit she has had since childhood and has never quite named or decided to keep. It simply happens. The day arranges itself in her mind in a loose kind of order, not a list, not an inventory, just the shape of it. The Whitmore proposal, finished with 12 minutes to spare. The phone number caught and corrected. The moment with Helen by the window. The job announcement. Tommy Ferris. She sits with the Tommy Ferris part for a moment. Here is something true about Beverly which I want to say clearly. She is not a woman who has suppressed herself so completely that she has no idea what she wants. She knows exactly what she wants. She has always known. She wants to work in accounts. She wants to be in the room where the decisions about the campaigns are made, not in the room where the decisions get typed up afterward. She has ideas. She does not think of them constantly or dramatically, but she has them, the way a person who has been paying careful attention to a thing for years accumulates observations, and she would like to use them. She also knows that in 1958, on the 14th floor of a Madison Avenue advertising firm, the path between where she is and where she wants to be is not a path that is clearly visible. It is more like the shape of something that might become a path, eventually, if enough things change. She has read about firms in other cities where women have moved into account roles. She has heard from Margaret about things happening in publishing. She pays attention. She does not lose hope. This is, I think, one of the most remarkable things about Beverly, and about the women like her, and there are many of them, many more than the cultural picture of the 1950s would suggest, that they carry their ambitions intact through day after day of a world that is not designed for those ambitions, and they do not quite let go. The Sally Harmon situation is a case in point. Sally Harmon was, until 6 months ago, on the 11th floor, not the typing pool but a step above it, working as a sort of administrative assistant to one of the junior partners. She was competent and methodical, and had the specific gift of organisation that turns a cluttered operation into a clear one. The junior partner noticed this. He began, over the course of several months, bringing her into initial client meetings, not to participate, simply to take notes, but present. She was present for conversations she was not supposed to be participating in, and she absorbed them the way Beverly absorbs the correspondence she types, which is to say completely. Then the junior partner was moved to the Chicago office. The man who replaced him did not continue the practice. Sally Harmon returned to administrative work and is still there, on 11, 2 floors below Beverly, and occasionally they ride the elevator together, and they exchange the kind of look that says something complete without saying anything. This is not a horror story, or rather, it is not only a horror story, it is also the story of what you do with what you are given, and how you hold your own standards inside a system that does not always make space for them. Sally Harmon's notes from those meetings were, by her own account, the most useful documents she had ever produced. She knows things about client relationships and campaign strategy that are sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere and will probably never be referenced again. But she knows them. They are in her. And there is a version of this observation that is supposed to be consoling, that the knowledge you carry is yours regardless of whether the institution you carry it in ever acknowledges it. Beverly finds this only partially true. The knowledge is better than its absence, that is clear, but knowledge without application has a particular kind of weight to it, the weight of potential that has no outlet, and Sally Harmon carries that weight with the same composure she carries everything, which is to say entirely invisibly, because visible weight is evidence of not coping, and not coping is the one thing you cannot afford. There are women in the building who have left. Not fired, left, married and transitioned out, which is the approved narrative, the one that makes the departure make sense within the era's terms. And some of those women did want to leave, genuinely wanted the life that leaving represented. But some of them left for reasons that had more to do with a slow erosion of whatever it was that had made them want to be there in the first place. When the job you are good at does not expand, and the recognition does not come, and the room you are working in begins to feel more like a container than a place, leaving begins to look less like retreat and more like self-preservation. Beverly has thought about this. She has had what she would describe as her low weeks, and in the low weeks she has sat in the apartment on 33rd Street, in the armchair, and held the question at a slight distance and looked at it. What would leaving look like? Where would she go? Back to Queens? To a different city? There is something about Chicago that interests her, though she cannot entirely say why, whether it is a real interest or just the specific draw of anywhere that is not here. To a different kind of work entirely, though this is more difficult because the kinds of work open to her in 1958 are not dramatically different from the ones she is already doing. What she has decided in the low weeks is that leaving is not what she wants. What she wants is the thing she cannot quite yet have, and the question is whether the patience to wait for it is a form of wisdom or a form of stubbornness, and she is not always sure she knows the difference. She suspects the answer is that it can be both at the same time. She has decided to proceed as if it is wisdom, because the alternative interpretation is not useful. Beverly thinks about this in the armchair, with her feet tucked under her, while the television on the floor above murmurs and the city goes about its business outside the window. The city at this hour on a Wednesday, 9 o'clock 9:15, is doing a specific and particular thing. It is not the city of morning traffic and newspaper vendors and the purposeful noise of commerce getting underway. And it is not the city of late night, which has its own sounds, sharper and more intermittent, the sounds of people going somewhere chosen rather than somewhere necessary. This is the middle hour, the quiet slot between those two registers, when the offices are dark and the entertainment district has not yet reached its peak, and the residential buildings are doing what they do at this hour, which is simply containing the specific private lives of millions of people who have come home and taken off their shoes and are reading or watching television, or talking to someone they love, or lying in the dark thinking about a letter they have sent or have not yet sent. Beverly finds the city at this hour very good company. She has always been someone who notices the quality of a particular hour's sound, the way it changes through the day and through the night, the way it is different on a Tuesday than on a Sunday, the way rain changes it and winter changes it and a holiday morning changes it almost beyond recognition. This is a habit she cannot entirely explain but would not give up. She picks up a novel from the side table. She is currently reading a mystery set in England, which she borrowed from the lending library on 31st Street, and is halfway through, and reads for an hour with complete absorption, her feet tucked under her in the armchair, the floor lamp warm and steady over her shoulder. The mystery is good. The setting is a country house in the sort of England that exists in fiction and only partially in fact, and the detective is sharp and unhurried and pays careful attention to small details, which Beverly finds very satisfying. She has always been drawn to fiction that rewards careful reading, that places the important things in the corners of scenes rather than at the center of them, that trusts the reader to notice. She reads the way she works, thoroughly, without rushing, catching everything. At 9 o'clock she prepares for bed. The evening preparation is in its own way as ritual-rich as the morning one, though the energy is different. This is the unwinding, the removing, the return to a self that does not need to meet any standard but her own. She removes her makeup first. The cold cream again, worked in those same small circles, then the warm cloth. The face in the mirror, once the cold cream is off, is recognizably the same face and also slightly different, quieter somehow, softer. The day's performance set aside with the cotton. She pats it dry and applies a night cream, which is heavier than the daytime version, and works it in along the forehead and cheekbones and jaw. She rolls her hair. This is the weekly calculus of the salon set. The Wednesday evening involves a series of small foam rollers positioned precisely to support the existing wave structure and prevent it from collapsing overnight, so that Thursday and Friday will look as close to Monday as possible. The Saturday salon visit is the reset. Everything in between is maintenance. She rolls each section with the practiced efficiency of years, pins each roller with a small clip, and ties a lightweight hairnet over the whole arrangement. In the mirror she looks. She thinks, not unkindly, about herself, exactly like every woman she knows looks before bed, and exactly like no one who will ever appear in a magazine. She brushes her teeth with the measured care of someone who has read the warnings about dental health. She washes her hands and her face one more time, a final brief wash with cool water that feels good after the day. In her bedroom she folds down the covers, the sheet, the cotton blanket, the thin wool blanket on top, and slides into bed in the careful sideways way that keeps the rollers from pressing into her skull at the wrong angle. The satin pillowcase is cool against her cheek. She reaches to turn off the lamp on the bedside table. In the dark, the city is still doing what it does, but muffled by the closed window, just the low ambient hum of it, the occasional horn, the rumble of something on the avenue. Beverly lies in the dark and thinks for a moment about tomorrow. Thursday is Hargrove's meeting day. He convenes his account supervisors in the big conference room on the 4th floor every Thursday morning at 10, which means the 4th floor secretary will need 2 copies of the morning's correspondence by 9:30, and Beverly has already made a note of this, a small annotation on the card she keeps in the upper right corner of her desktop. On Thursday afternoon, the Caldwell correspondence that she set aside today will be waiting, but Thursday is also the day she has dinner with Margaret. Margaret works at a small publishing house in the Flatiron building and has the kind of energy that fills a room in the specific way of someone who has always understood that they are exactly as capable as the most capable person in any given space, and has simply decided to proceed on that basis, which is an unusual quality, and one that Beverly finds both inspiring and occasionally exhausting. They will go to the Italian place on 28th Street, the one with the red-checked tablecloths, and the owner who brings extra bread without being asked. They will have wine, which Beverly will drink slowly because she is not a fast drinker, but she is a willing one. They will talk about their weeks, which Beverly will present with the careful selective editing of a person who knows the difference between what is funny in retrospect and what is only frustrating, and Margaret will present with a furious specificity, naming names and quoting exact sentences, and this will be the best part. Margaret has also been talking, for the last several months, about a woman she knows at another firm, a woman who has moved into a copywriting role, actually writing the campaign language, rather than just managing the correspondence around it. Beverly has been listening to these stories with a particular quality of attention that she suspects Margaret has noticed. She closes her eyes. The room is very quiet now. The roller at the back of her head has shifted slightly, pressing at a small angle that is not quite uncomfortable but is not quite comfortable either, and she adjusts it with one hand and then stays still. She is, all things considered, a happy person. She has considered this recently, deliberately, with the kind of honest inventory she gives herself every so often, and the result is genuinely yes, she is happy, with the particular quality of happiness that comes not from the absence of difficulty, but from a certain alignment between what you are and what you do, even when what you do takes place inside a world that has not fully decided what it thinks of you yet. The sound of the city is very steady now, a low, continuous sound, almost like water, almost like breathing. Beverly drifts, and the Wednesday is finished. But Beverly's Wednesday is only one Wednesday in a million of them, and to understand what the unspoken rules really meant, you have to step back and look at the whole world they were living in. All these women typing and filing and carrying coffee and correcting their own errors and laughing in the ladies' room and catching the 5:15 subway home, because the rules were not invented in a vacuum. They emerged from something, and the something is worth understanding. In 1950, roughly 32% of American women were employed outside the home. By 1960, that number would be closer to 38%, edging upward. This is not a small number. These were millions of women in offices, in factories, in hospitals, in department stores, in restaurants, in every kind of institution that required human labor. And yet, as we have noted, the cultural picture of the decade, the magazines, the television programs, the advertisements, barely showed them. What the culture showed instead was the housewife, the comfortable, domestic, seemingly well-adjusted housewife, managing her home with cheerful efficiency and expressing no professional ambitions beyond the management of her household and the maintenance of her family's happiness. This image was enormously powerful, not because it was accurate. It was not accurate, not for anything like a majority of American women, but because it was everywhere, continuous and consistent and always slightly aspirational, the domestic version of the airbrushed fashion model, an ideal rather than a description. The advertising industry was particularly invested in this image, and the reason is not complicated. Women were understood to be the primary household purchasers, which meant they were the target of a very large proportion of consumer advertising, and the most effective advertising tells you who you are or who you should want to be while simultaneously selling you a product that promises to get you closer to the image. If the image was the happy housewife in the immaculate kitchen, then every appliance and cleaning product and convenience food was a vehicle for getting closer to that image. And the closer you got, the more things you needed to buy. The women who were actually working, who came home from the office and then managed the domestic expectations that had not been suspended for their benefit, were consuming the same advertising. They read the same magazines under the dryers at Greta's salon, on the evening subway, in the half hour before bed. They absorbed the same image of the woman they were supposed to be, the one who was not riding the Lexington Avenue subway in navy wool at 7:22 in the morning, and they existed in the uncomfortable cognitive space between that image and their own lives, which were considerably more complex and considerably less photogenic and considerably more real. Beverly does not feel oppressed by the magazines exactly. She feels about them the way she feels about the sweetheart, somewhere between irritated and above it, with a large helping of simple pragmatic disregard. She reads them for the occasional useful information, the new recipe that is actually good, the fashion item she might adapt in some useful direction, the article that occasionally, under layers of domestic framing, contains something genuinely interesting about something genuinely interesting. She is very good at reading for the parts that apply to her, and setting aside the rest. But the rest has a weight that is worth acknowledging. The consistent, decade-long, culturally pervasive message that a woman's highest expression of self was domestic, that the kitchen was the proper site of her intelligence, and the management of her husband's contentment was the proper outlet for her ambitions. This is not nothing. Even when you disagree with it, even when you recognize it for what it is, even when you are Beverly and you are quite certain of what you want and where you are going, even then, something that is said this consistently in this many venues, with this much cultural authority behind it, reaches you. It has to. The question is only how much, and what you do with the reaching. This is what Betty Friedan would call, a few years later, the problem that has no name. Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, published in 1963, would put words to something that a very large number of women in the 1950s had been experiencing without a framework for naming it. The vague, persistent disquiet of a life that does not quite match its official description. The gap between what you were told you should want and what you actually wanted. The specific exhaustion of performing contentment with a situation that was not quite right, for reasons you could not entirely articulate because the language for articulating them did not yet exist in common usage. Beverly will read that book when it comes out. She will read it in 3 evenings in the armchair with the floor lamp on, and she will recognize things in it the way you recognize the face of someone you have known for years in a photograph taken before you met them. Oh, she will think, that, yes, she has been thinking that in her own careful and unarticulated way for quite a long time. But that is 5 years from now. Tonight, on a Wednesday in October 1958, Beverly is in the armchair with her mystery novel, and the city is doing its 9 o'clock thing outside the window, and she is content enough, genuinely, with the specific contentment of someone who has had a full and complicated day, and is now in a room that is quiet and warm and entirely their own. The domestic economy of women in offices in the 1950s was its own remarkable institution, and I find myself wanting to spend a moment with it because it connects so directly to the rules Beverly follows every day. The women in the typing pool were, for the most part, earning their own money. This was not a trivial thing in the context of the era. The independent income of an unmarried working woman was something that previous generations of women had not reliably had, and it produced a specific kind of freedom. Not complete freedom, not freedom from the expectations of the employer or the social expectations of the era, but freedom in the more literal sense of the word, the ability to pay one's own rent, to make one's own decisions about how to spend what remained after rent, to exist in the world without requiring a husband's financial permission for every choice. Beverly pays her own rent on 33rd Street. She pays her own subway fare. She buys her own groceries at the A&P on 34th Street, choosing what she wants to eat rather than calibrating to someone else's preferences. She selects the books she borrows from the lending library, goes to the films she wants to see, has dinner with Margaret every other Thursday at the restaurant with the red-checked tablecloths, and considers none of this remarkable because it is simply what her life is and has been for 4 years. What it cost her to have this life is what we have spent this evening examining. The navy wool skirt and the white cotton gloves, and the 340 cups of coffee and the careful voice and the deliberate grammar and the 14 pages in 40 minutes with no acknowledgement afterward. The price of the independence was the performance, and the performance was constant, and the price was real. This is the central exchange of the working woman's life in 1958. Autonomy purchased through performance. You could not have the one without the other, not in this decade, not in this environment. The question was whether the autonomy was worth the performance, and the answer for Beverly is yes. Not triumphantly, yes. Not without qualification, but genuinely and sincerely, yes. She does not wish she were someone else. She wishes some things were different. This is a distinction she finds significant. There is also a class dimension to the lives of the women in the typing pool that is worth naming, because it shapes everything about the rules they follow in ways that are easy to overlook if you only look at the surface. The women who worked in these offices were, predominantly, from working and lower middle class families. Their fathers were in various kinds of trade and service work. Their mothers managed households on careful budgets. They themselves had gone to public high schools where the commercial track, typing, bookkeeping, business English, was the direction toward which girls who were not going to college were pointed, and often the direction toward which girls who were going to college were pointed as a backup, just in case. The typing pool was not, from the vantage point of these women's families, a disappointing outcome. It was a good job, a respectable job, an indoor job with a salary and, at some companies, health benefits, and the particular kind of respectability that came from working in an office rather than in a factory or a shop. The mothers of these women had often worked in more physically demanding conditions and found the office job genuinely aspirational on their daughters' behalf. The daughters themselves had grown up understanding that the office was the direction their intelligence and their training pointed them, and they had arrived at their desks with a mixture of genuine satisfaction and the particular awareness of people who know exactly where they rank in a system they did not design. The rules, seen from this angle, make a different kind of sense. If you came from a family where a single wrong impression could cost you a job that represented a significant upward movement from where your family started, you did not take risks with appearance or manner or the management of relationships with supervisors. You attended to the stocking seam and the lipstick and the coffee and the conditional grammar, not as an imposition from above, but as a protection of something genuinely valuable. The job was real, the salary was real. The independence it purchased was real. You did not risk any of it carelessly. This is not to say the rules were not also a constraint. They were both things simultaneously. This is the character of most institutional arrangements. They constrain and they protect at the same time, and the ratio of constraint to protection shifts depending on who you are and where you stand in the institution. And the people with the least formal power have the least ability to renegotiate the ratio. Beverly knows this. She has always known it, in the way you know things that are simply part of the shape of the world you grew up in, before you have the vocabulary to articulate them. She knows it the way she knows the difference between what $12 looks like and what $12 costs. What the culture showed instead was the housewife, specifically the happy housewife, in her fitted shirtwaist dress, in her spotless kitchen, with her husband's dinner ready at 6, and her children's homework organized, and her social calendar managed with an efficiency that would have impressed a military planner. This image was not exactly invented in the 1950s. Versions of it had existed for decades, but in this particular decade, with the particular power of television and the particular post-war pressure toward domestic normalcy, the image became something like an ambient standard, something so pervasive and so consistent that it began to feel less like an idea and more like a law of nature. The women who were working, the Beverlys and Dorises and Helens of the era, existed inside a strange double reality. They went to the office and managed the real complexity of real work, the schedules, the correspondence, the filing systems, the client relationships that were routed through them even when the credit for those relationships went elsewhere. And then they went home and were expected, to varying degrees depending on their circumstances, to also be the woman in the shirtwaist dress. The cooking was still their responsibility. The cleaning was still their responsibility. The management of social obligations was still their responsibility. Women who were married and working in 1958 were managing, in effect, 2 jobs. This was understood by everyone involved and stated explicitly by almost no one. The rules we have been following Beverly through, the appearance rules, the deference rules, the silence rules, the coffee rules, they were not arbitrary, they were adaptations. They were the behavioral language that a woman developed when she was operating inside a system that had not quite decided whether she should be there, and that expressed that ambivalence by making her presence contingent on a kind of perfect, unobtrusive competence. You could be there, but you had to earn it continuously, visibly, through your appearance and your manner, and you're never quite letting the effort show. You had to be good enough that no one could say you weren't good enough, and you had to be unthreatening enough that no one felt moved to say it anyway. The seam in the stocking was not just a seam, it was a statement. I have attended to the small things. I can be trusted with the large ones. And if you could not be trusted with the stocking, the logic went, unstated, never articulated, but operating just the same. What else might you be careless with? This is a logic that only works if you accept its premises. The women who were wearing the stockings were by and large excellent at their jobs, and would have been excellent at considerably more demanding jobs if the system had arranged for them to hold them. Beverly knows this. Doris knows this. Helen knows this. They know it the way you know things that cannot be stated directly in the environment you are in, which is to say they know it very well and very quietly, and they carry it with them like a small and careful secret. The hair appointments deserve their own consideration, because I think they are more interesting than they might seem. Every woman in the typing pool, not some of them, not most of them, effectively all of them, went to the salon on a regular schedule. Not every week for everyone, though for many women that was the norm, but regularly. Often enough that the state of the hair at the beginning of the week was understood to be a managed state, not a natural one. And I want to be careful here about how I say this, because there is a version of this observation that sounds contemptuous, like these women were vain or uncritical or simply duped by the beauty industry. They were not any of those things. They were navigating a professional environment with specific and consistent expectations, and they were doing so with the intelligence and practicality that characterized everything else they did. The salon visit was usually on Friday or Saturday. You went in, you sat in the chair, your hair was washed and set and placed under the dryer, those enormous hood dryers that you sat under for 40 minutes, holding a magazine at a slightly awkward angle, the heat making the air around your head feel heavy and particular. And then it was combed out and styled by someone who was in many cases a gifted professional who understood hair the way craftspeople understand their material, the way a woodworker understands grain, the way a tailor understands drape, with years of accumulated tactile knowledge that does not translate easily into words. The set was the specific term for what happened when your damp hair was wound around rollers, not the foam kind that comes later, but earlier versions in various forms, pin curls, wave clamps, hard rubber rollers of varying diameters, and then dried in that configuration so the wave or curl was baked, in a sense, into the shape of the hair shaft. Different sizes of roller created different sizes of wave. Larger rollers produced looser, softer waves. Smaller ones produced tighter curls. The pattern of rollers across your head determined the geography of your finished style, and a skilled operator memorized that geography for each of her regular clients without needing to be told twice. The result was supposed to last a week. In practice, it lasted something between 4 and 7 days, depending on the weather, your sleeping position, your level of physical activity, and the particular properties of your hair. Fine hair lost its set faster than coarser hair. Humid weather flattened everything. Physical labor, anything that produced real heat, could undermine a set in a morning. Women who worked in offices had an easier time maintaining the set than women who worked in more physically demanding environments, which is one small way in which the typing pool was genuinely preferable to other kinds of work. You maintained the set between appointments with rollers at night, which Beverly does, and with a light touch of hairspray in the morning, not the heavy lacquer kind that arrives later, but the lighter 1950s version, applied with a short burst from a small aerosol can that you held about 12 inches from your head and moved in a sweeping arc. The spray set the style without stiffening it, which was the desired result. You wanted the hair to look arranged rather than sprayed, to look like the product of nature and talent rather than chemistry, even though it was entirely the product of chemistry. And everyone knew this, and no one said so. Hairspray was relatively new in the early 1950s. The aerosol can itself, this pressurized metal container that could be tilted at any angle and produce a fine, continuous mist, had been developed during the Second World War for a different purpose entirely. The military had used the technology to dispense insecticides in the Pacific Theater. After the war, the technology found its way into consumer products with impressive speed, because pressurized aerosol was miraculous for its moment, a way to produce and apply a fine mist without a pump, without a squeeze bottle, without any labor beyond pressing a button. Hairspray was among the first beauty applications. So was insect repellent and deodorant and spray paint. The aerosol age arrived in the early 50s, and it had the character of all the decade's technological enthusiasms, which is to say it was embraced with confidence and without much inquiry into what might happen to the ozone layer several decades later. Before hairspray, women used setting lotions and wave preparations and the specific kind of pin structure that you could maintain reasonably well if you were careful. Hairspray changed the calculus. It gave you something to lock in the style after you had created it, which extended the life of the set and made the between-visit maintenance somewhat more manageable. It also created a new problem, which was build-up, and the solution to build-up was more thorough washing, which meant more frequent salon visits, or more thorough home washing, which was a production in itself because you could not simply wash your hair in the shower and let it air dry in 1958. You could not. Air-dried hair in 1958 looked like air-dried hair in 1958, which was not the managed state the environment required. If you washed your hair at home, you set it at home, which meant the rollers and the sitting under the bathroom ceiling fixture with your head wrapped in a modified kind of patience until it dried. The salon visit was also, it should be said, a social event with its own rules and pleasures. You had a regular salon, and ideally a regular operator within that salon. The woman who understood how your hair behaved in humidity, who remembered the correct setting pattern for your particular style, who could be trusted to recommend when it was time for a change, versus when the current approach was still working. This relationship had a specific warmth, a specific kind of intimacy that existed in the shared, quiet attention of someone working carefully with your hair. You talked to her, or you sat comfortably without talking, or you sat under the dryer and read the magazines that the salon kept. Women's magazines, beauty magazines, the kind with the shirtwaist dress housewife on the cover, and the recipes for things made with cream of mushroom soup inside. The magazines under the dryer were their own small anthropological exhibit. They showed a world in which every woman's primary concern was her home, her husband, and her children. The career woman, when she appeared at all, was usually in an advertisement, selling stockings or a typewriter or a desk accessory, and the advertisement's message was always somewhere in the vicinity of, even working women need to be pleasant and well presented. The editorial content had no interest in her ambitions or her salary or whether she was being paid fairly. It had considerable interest in her figure, her complexion, the state of her marriage, and whether her husband was happy when he came home. Beverly reads these magazines under the dryer with the detached appreciation she brings to most things, noting what they are saying and what they are not saying, storing it in the same part of her mind that stores the job announcements and the Tommy Ferris information. She does not find them insulting exactly. She finds them limited, which is a different thing. Beverly's operator is named Greta, and she has been doing Beverly's hair for 4 years, which is to say she has known Beverly through 2 apartments and several haircuts, and the brief period when Beverly decided she wanted to try a shorter style, and then decided she had been wrong about that. Greta does not say "I told you so" about the shorter style. She simply notes, when the hair has grown back to an appropriate length, that it sits better this way, doesn't it? And Beverly agrees, and the subject is closed. Greta is in her 40s and has the specific authority of a skilled practitioner who does not need to assert her authority because it is simply present, and Beverly trusts her in the way you trust someone who is very good at something specific and has never been wrong about it in 4 years. There is also the fact that Greta, in the comfortable neutrality of the salon space, says things that Beverly's other environments do not permit. Not radical things, but real things. She will say, for instance, regarding a new client who has come in frustrated by something at work, "Well, that is simply how it is for now," and then pause with a very specific weight on the "for now." She will mention obliquely a daughter who is studying at Hunter College, and the particular quality of her voice when she mentions the daughter communicates without stating it that she considers this very important and does not care that people think young women at college are unusual or unnecessary. These small signals accumulate too in their way. On Saturdays, the salon is warm and steamy and loud with the dryers and the conversations that happen over and around and through them. And Beverly sits in the chair and lets Greta work and feels, for those 40 minutes or so, the particular restoring quality of being taken care of rather than taking care. The shampoo is done at a basin with a gentle pressure of fingertips across the scalp that Beverly finds more soothing than she would easily admit to anyone. The warm water, the smell of the shampoo, which is something floral and slightly industrial at the same time, the specific sound of rinsing, then Greta's hands working the setting lotion through the wet hair, the precise placement of each roller, a row at the crown, a row along the side, working toward the nape, the click of each roller clip as it is secured, a rhythm to it, familiar and steady. It is one of the great pleasures of her week, and she does not take it for granted. The salon visit also, by the way, had an interesting relationship to the working world in a way that nobody discussed directly. For a woman who appeared on Monday morning with her hair visibly neglected, flat, unstyled, the set from the previous weekend mostly fallen, there was a subtle but real social cost. Not anything stated, not anything dramatic, simply the way that certain things are noticed in environments where appearance is understood to be part of the professional package, and where noticing them becomes, over time, part of how people form assessments. The women who maintained their presentation consistently, the ones whose hair was always set, whose stockings were always unflawed, whose shoes were always polished, were perceived, consciously or not, as reliable, as the kind of people who could be counted on to manage the small things correctly, the detail, the follow-through, and from there the logic went, they could perhaps be counted on for larger things, though the connection between stocking quality and professional competence is something that collapses immediately if you examine it even briefly, and yet it operated, and everyone inside the system understood that it operated. This is a small thing, but it operated every week, every month, for every year of a working woman's career in 1958. And the cumulative weight of small things is not small. Let us think for a moment about the morning commute from a different angle. Not Beverly's commute specifically, but the commute as a general phenomenon for working women of the era, because it contained its own set of navigational rules that nobody taught you explicitly, but that you learned quite quickly through trial and the specific education of making an error once and understanding exactly what had happened. The subway in 1958 New York was a place of very particular social negotiation for women. It was public in the fullest sense, a space that anyone could occupy, structured by very few formal rules, governed almost entirely by custom and the implicit social contracts that strangers maintain with each other when they are enclosed in a space they cannot choose to leave. And those customs where they intersected with women were not always comfortable. You stood in certain positions, you placed your handbag in certain ways, you arranged your expression in a way that communicated occupied rather than available, not unfriendly. Unfriendly attracted its own kind of attention, but simply elsewhere, in your own thoughts, reading something, looking at the middle distance with the practiced neutrality of a person who has somewhere to be and is simply waiting to arrive there. Beverly is very good at this. She had to learn it in her first months of commuting alone, when she was 23 and newly arrived from the family home in Queens, and still carrying some of the wide openness of someone who has not yet understood that wide openness in a public space can be received as invitation. A year of daily subway rides had calibrated her considerably. She does not think of this as a loss. She thinks of it as a skill, which is perhaps the same thing from a certain angle, but she finds the skill framing more useful. On the morning trains, she reads or she thinks. On the evening trains, she reads, or she lets the motion of the car and the noise of it carry her towards something close to rest, a kind of moving stillness, which is almost pleasant in its way. Many of the women on the subway with her are going to similar destinations: offices, shops, hospitals. She can often tell from the particular combination of presentation and direction what kind of work a woman does. The nurses have a different coat of shoes. The teachers carry more bags. The women going to the garment district have a specific kind of quickness to them, a pace that is not anxious but simply accustomed to covering ground efficiently. Beverly finds this silent companionship of the morning train more sustaining than she might have expected. She is not alone in this particular transit. The city is full of women doing this same thing right now at this exact hour, and the knowledge of that has a quality to it that is somewhere between comfort and solidarity, though she would not necessarily call it either. The 2-block walk from the subway exit to her building is the interval she has always liked best in the commute, because it is outdoors and because the city at that hour has a quality she finds hard to name. Not yet fully awake, not still asleep, somewhere in between, with the light just right and the smell of the street being a combination of things that is uniquely that particular 2 blocks at that particular hour, and which she will recognize anywhere for the rest of her life as the smell of going to work. The matter of voice, of how you spoke, when you spoke, the precise pitch and pace and register of it, was another of the unspoken rules, and one of the most pervasive. Women in offices in 1958 were expected to have a specific quality of voice, not simply to be quiet, though quiet was certainly preferred over its alternative. More specifically, the voice was supposed to be warm without being familiar, clear without being loud, confident without being assertive. The line between confidence and assertiveness was a crucial one, and it was drawn with remarkable consistency at exactly the point where a woman's speech began to sound like it was not leaving room for revision. You could state things. Of course you could. Stating things was necessary, the work required it, but you stated them in a way that preserved the fiction that you were offering them for consideration rather than presenting them as conclusions. You phrased them in the conditional where possible. You left a small grammatical opening. I wonder if we might, rather than we should. Would it be worth considering, rather than I think? I could be wrong, but before something you are very certain about. Beverly does this. She is aware that she does it. She began doing it consciously at first, in the first months after starting work, because she had received enough implicit signals to understand the code. Now she does it without thinking, which is perhaps the most interesting part. The rule has become so internalized that it no longer requires a decision. What she has retained, however, is the awareness. She knows she is doing it. She knows what she would sound like if she didn't. She tries occasionally to notice the difference between what she actually thinks and what she is presenting herself as thinking, and the gap between those things is rarely large. But it is always there, a small, consistent negotiation between her genuine self and the version of herself that the room finds manageable. There is also the matter of disagreement, which is a specific and delicate thing. Disagreeing with a supervisor, in the open, in front of others, was the single most dangerous conversational act a woman in Beverly's position could perform. Not dangerous in a dramatic sense, not dangerous in the way that produces immediate, visible consequences. Dangerous in the slow, quiet, almost invisible way of a social debt that accrues without being named and is eventually called in through means that have nothing to do apparently with the original disagreement. The management of disagreement was therefore an art form, and a highly practiced one. You could disagree if you did it in the right way at the right time with the right framing. The right way was always through the conditional. I wonder if there might be another way to look at this. The right time was never in front of an audience if you could possibly arrange it. One-to-one in a brief aside was infinitely safer than across a conference table, and the right framing was always away from the personal and toward the practical. Not I disagree with you, but the client might respond differently, making the source of the concern external, making it about the work rather than about the relationship. making it possible for the supervisor to change his mind without it looking like he changed his mind. Beverly has done this many times. It works, sometimes, in the limited sense that the outcome is different from what it would have been. She once caught an error in a billing document that would have resulted in overcharging a client by a very significant amount, and she raised it through the conditional, through the one-to-one, through the external framing, and the error was corrected without anyone acknowledging that she had caught it, and the client relationship was preserved, and Beverly's name was not mentioned in the positive resolution of the problem. That last part is not incidental. Credit was another of the unspoken rules, and its logic was essentially the same as the logic of everything else. You did not claim it directly. Claiming credit for something in a direct and explicit way was a kind of assertion that read, in the social grammar of the office, as aggressive. You allowed credit to be distributed by others, which meant that in practice the credit often went to the person with the authority to distribute it, who was rarely you. You were instead developing something called a reputation. A reputation in this context was a slow accumulation of impressions in other people's minds. Impressions of competence, reliability, pleasantness, discretion. It was built not through any single visible act, but through the consistent, daily, unglamorous repetition of doing things correctly and quietly. And the reputation, if it was built well enough, eventually created a small amount of protection and perhaps even opportunity, perhaps, sometime, on a long enough timeline. Beverly believes in the timeline. She is not sure the timeline is as long as the environment implies, but she believes in it. This is, when I think about it, an act of genuine faith, not the religious kind. Beverly is a regular churchgoer, but this is not what I mean. I mean faith in the sense of choosing to act as if a thing is true in the face of considerable evidence that it might not be. The faith that competence maintained over time will eventually be recognized in some useful form. The faith that the letter she has written and put in the mail will reach the right desk and be received by someone capable of seeing past the fact that the sender is a woman in the typing pool. The faith that the world she is navigating is capable of change, even if it is changing slowly, even if it is not changing fast enough. The exhausting thing about this kind of faith is that it requires constant renewal. You have to decide every day to keep believing it. And some days, the day Tommy Ferris gets the job, the day a man from the third floor calls her sweetheart and takes the file she found without looking at her, the day she types a 14-page proposal in under 40 minutes and hears nothing about it. Some days the decision requires more of her than other days. She makes it anyway. There is something in that I find genuinely admirable every time I think about it. Not because she is unusual in making it. She is not. The typing pool is full of women making the same decision with the same quietness. But because the sheer repetition of it, day after day, without external validation, without the feedback systems that make sustained effort easier to maintain, is a form of discipline that I think deserves to be called what it is. The phone rang differently in 1958. And this is a small thing that matters more than it sounds. In the office, the telephones were all black, all heavy, all connected to the wall by cords with a specific amount of give to them, enough that you could pull the receiver to your ear and perhaps half turn in your chair, but no more. The sound of a telephone ringing in the typing pool was the sound of the bell inside the handset unit itself, a mechanical ring that you would recognize immediately if you heard it today. The kind of ring that sounds like nothing so much as a telephone ringing in an old movie, because it is the sound those phones actually made. When the phone on Beverly's desk rang, she answered it in a specific way, not the way she would answer her home telephone, which was simply hello in the voice of someone who is at home. The office telephone required a voice that was one calibration up from her regular speaking voice, slightly more formal, slightly cleaner in the diction, the greeting complete and professional. Good morning, Hargrove Account Services, Beverly speaking, or the shortened version if the caller was someone internal. Beverly speaking. She learnt this in her first week and has never varied it since, not even when she is tired, not even at 4 in the afternoon when the day has been long. The telephone rule was, in practice, one of the first rules a new woman in the office had to master, because the telephone was often the first encounter a client or external contact had with the firm, and that encounter was frequently with a woman in the pool rather than with the men in the offices. You were representing the firm's professionalism with your voice, before anything else, before any document or meeting. This was understood, and the standard was therefore high. What was less understood, or at least less stated, was the way the telephone served as a kind of filter. Calls that were clearly for one of the account supervisors went to the supervisors. Calls that were unclear were handled by the woman who answered them, which meant she often gathered the information, assessed the nature of the call, summarized it, wrote the note, and passed it along. She had, in other words, frequently managed the first several minutes of a client relationship before anyone in an office knew the client had called. And this was not noted or credited or given any formal recognition. It simply happened every day as part of the invisible architecture. Beverly is good on the telephone. She has a quality of voice on it that somehow sounds both professional and warm at the same time, which is actually quite difficult, and which she arrived at through a period of conscious attention to the specific difference between how she naturally speaks and how the telephone required her to speak, and the gradual integration of those two things into something that sounds unforced. Hargrove's clients, the ones she has spoken to regularly over the 2.5 years, know her voice. She is aware of this. One of them, a man from a firm in Philadelphia who calls every other Thursday for routine account updates, asks how she is doing before asking for Hargrove, which is not because he is particularly attentive to her as an individual, but because she is the consistent, pleasant voice that has been part of every interaction he has had with this building, and her voice is therefore, in some way, part of what he thinks of when he thinks of the firm. This is not nothing. Beverly knows it is not nothing. She is not sure what exactly it is, but it is not nothing. There is a woman on the 3rd floor named Ruth who handles the telephone for the main reception area, which means she is the voice that every person who calls the building hears first. Every single day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Ruth has been in that position for 11 years. She has never once received a formal performance review that mentioned the quality of her telephone voice, because telephone voice is not a category on the performance review form, which lists only typing speed, accuracy, and attendance. Ruth is perfectly aware of this. She finds it somewhere between ironic and simply typical, and she is not bitter about it in the dramatic sense, just clear-eyed. She and Beverly ride the elevator together sometimes on Thursday mornings, when Beverly is going to the 4th floor to drop something off. They do not know each other particularly well, but they know each other in the way you know someone you have occupied the same space with for years, through repeated small proximity. They nod. Occasionally they say something. Once, during a thunderstorm that arrived suddenly in June and caught several people at lunch without umbrellas, Ruth offered Beverly her own umbrella for the 3-block walk to the subway, and Beverly accepted it and returned it the following morning with a small box of shortbread cookies from the bakery on 2nd Avenue. This exchange never became a friendship exactly, but it became something. That is the word I keep coming back to in the context of the typing pool and the women in it. Something. What they built together, what they offered each other, what they carried out of those rooms and into their other lives. It was something. It did not have the formal shape that would make it easy to name. It was not a union or a movement or an organized effort of any kind. But it was real, and it was sustained, and it was the thing that made the other things bearable. This is perhaps the piece that the history most often misses. When it talks about working women in this era, the emphasis falls rightly on the restrictions, the salary discrimination, the job categories, the management positions that were simply closed, the credit that went unrecognized. These things are important and true, but they do not account for the full texture of what these days were actually like, which included, alongside all of that, the lunch at the window table, and Greta at the salon, and the shortbread cookies, and the specific warmth of Helen saying that line about Hargrove in a dry voice, and Beverly laughing before she could stop herself. The difficulty of the era and the genuine pleasure of the era were not mutually exclusive. Both existed, both were real. A day could be frustrating in the morning and funny in the afternoon, discouraging on Tuesday and genuinely satisfying on Thursday, carrying a weight of unacknowledged effort and still feeling, at the end of it, like a day well spent. Beverly would tell you this if you asked her. She would not minimize the weight, but she would also tell you about the cheese sandwich and the New Yorker story about Spain. Both are part of the same life, the same Wednesday, the same woman. The coffee question keeps coming back to me because I think it is the most elegant compression of the entire dynamic, not elegant in a flattering sense, elegant in the way that a very efficient machine is elegant, every part doing exactly what it is designed to do, nothing wasted, the whole thing running very smoothly at a cost that is absorbed somewhere else. By 1958, there were women with considerable amounts of experience and skill working in office buildings all over the country. Women who had been in the workforce for a decade or longer, women who understood the businesses they worked in with an intimacy and a thoroughness that their nominal supervisors sometimes did not quite match. And those women were bringing coffee to those supervisors without being asked, because not bringing it would register as a statement, and making a statement about something so small would mark you as difficult in a way that was completely disproportionate to the thing itself. The genius, if you can call it that, and I am not sure you should, was in how small the things were. The coffee was not a major sacrifice. The lipstick reapplication was not a burden. The particular way you phrased a suggestion so as not to imply that your supervisor had not already considered it was not a significant cost in any single instance, but it accumulated. Every day, in every office, in every city, the accumulation was happening, and the accumulation constituted something larger than any of its individual components, a system that kept women's authority consistently below the threshold at which it would trigger the particular discomfort that the 1950s called trouble. The women knew this. By and large, in various degrees of articulateness about it, they knew. You can see it in the look Beverly and Helen share by the window. You can see it in what Doris says and does not say about the job announcement. You can see it in the way Carol eats her tuna sandwich with the composure of someone who has decided to find the situation she is in more interesting than it is annoying. Resilience. That is the word that comes to mind most persistently when I think about these women. Not the passive resilience of someone who has given up on changing anything, but something more active, more genuinely resourceful. They built lives inside the constraints that existed. They built friendships with enormous amounts of loyalty and specificity in them. They built competence, not the minimum competence required to retain their positions, but the full, detailed, exact competence of people who take their work seriously because it is their work, and because taking it seriously is who they are. And in many cases, the system they were building competence inside was the system that was going to change. Not yet, not in 1958. But the thing that is true about historical moments, when you look back at them, is that the changes that come later were always already present in embryonic and improbable forms, in the moments before they arrived. The conversations happening at the window table in the lunchroom on the 12th floor, guarded, careful, partial, with the particular sideways logic of people saying important things in environments not designed for important things. Those conversations were part of the long chain of conversations that eventually became something else. Beverly does not think of herself as living in a moment of historical consequence. She thinks of herself as living on a Wednesday in October, going to work and coming home and having dinner with Margaret on Thursday. She is not wrong about this. She is also, without knowing it, doing something that matters beyond a Whitmore proposal and the rose coral lipstick and the 340 cups of coffee. She is showing up, day after day, in the navy blue wool skirt and the white blouse, with the pearl brooch and the seam-free stockings and the hair that has held beautifully since Saturday. She is showing up and doing the work completely and not letting the system convince her that she is less than she is. This is harder than it sounds. The pressure to accept the categories you are placed in is very effective when it is applied continuously and without drama, when it is just the normal texture of every ordinary day. The women who managed not to be convinced, who remained underneath the careful voice and the strategic lipstick and the deliberate posture, entirely themselves, were doing something that required a kind of ongoing, quiet determination that rarely gets named as courage. I think it should. The autumn of 1958 gives way eventually to winter. The light through the 14th floor windows changes, the coats get heavier, the steam heat in the building comes on and the air inside becomes dry in the particular way of old New York buildings in winter, where you could put 3 glasses of water on your desk and watch them disappear by noon. Beverly is still at her desk. Doris is still at her desk. Helen has gotten a cold that keeps her home for 3 days in November, during which the temperature at the window table drops noticeably. Carol from the 7th floor comes down for the duration of Helen's absence and proves to be funnier than anyone expected. Tommy Ferris gets the junior account coordinator position. Beverly hears about it on a Tuesday from the woman who does the mail on the 3rd floor and who mentions it in passing. The way you mention something you think the other person already knows. Beverly files the information with the Whitmore proposal and the 32nd floor phone number in the section of her mind that keeps evidence of how things are for later reference. 3 weeks after that, she writes a letter. She has been drafting it in small increments on her lunch break, using her own paper in her own handwriting, working it and reworking it until the language is exactly right, direct but not demanding, confident but with the correct grammatical spacing left for consideration. She addresses it to Mr. Hargrove's immediate superior, who is a man she has never met but whose name she knows because she has typed his correspondence approximately 47 times. She explains in specific and measured terms her experience and her understanding of the Caldwell and Whitmore accounts, and her interest in account work. She mails it on the way to the subway on a Wednesday evening. She does not know what will happen. The odds are not in her favor. She understands the odds precisely. But she has decided that the thing she is responsible for is the letter itself, the quality of it, the courage of writing it, and she has done that. Whatever comes after is a different category of thing. Margaret over the Italian dinner says, "Good, just that. Good," with the specific warmth of someone who means it without needing to make a speech about it. Beverly drinks her wine slowly. The owner brings more bread. The red-checked tablecloth has a small red wine stain in the upper right corner that has been there for the last 4 visits, and Beverly notices it the way she notices things, with the quiet registering of a detail that is now part of the familiar texture of the place. Outside, the city makes its sounds. Inside, it is warm. She is 27 years old and she has a job and an apartment and an African violet and a letter in the mail and a good friend who said good with the right kind of warmth, and she is, if you take her at her word, and I think you should, doing reasonably well. The rules she lives by are not her creation. Some of them are not things she would choose if choosing were available, but they are the shape of a particular kind of life, lived with a particular kind of integrity, and there is something in that worth holding. The decade will not stay the same. Nothing ever stays the same. By 1963, the Equal Pay Act will exist, for the first time making it illegal to pay a woman less than a man for the same work. Not immediately effective, not universally enforced, but existing, a line drawn where before there was only practice. By 1964, the Civil Rights Act will include a provision prohibiting sex discrimination in employment, and that provision will be treated initially as something close to a joke by some of the legislators who pass it, and will take years to mean what it eventually means. The women in the typing pool will not mostly be in the typing pool for the rest of their careers. Some will marry and leave as the era expected them to. Some will stay in the same positions carrying their accumulated expertise through decade after decade. Some, like Beverly, will find ways through, not easily, not without the letter and the waiting and the odds, but through. The advertising industry will eventually have women in accounts, in creative, in management, not quickly, not without the kind of incremental, unglamorous, largely uncelebrated work that Beverly is doing on a Wednesday in October. Going to her desk and doing her job completely, every day, for as many days as it takes. The unspoken rules will not disappear all at once. They will shift and thin and gradually become less binding, the way ice thins in spring, still there but less weight-bearing, until one day you notice that you are walking on solid ground. New rules will come, as they always do, because every era has its own version of the things you are expected to do without being told why. But the women who lived by these particular rules, who knew them so thoroughly they never had to think about them, who wore the navy wool and applied the rose coral and carried the coffee and corrected the typos and wrote the careful letters and laughed by the window table on their lunch breaks, they deserve to be seen clearly, not as victims, not as collaborators, not as symbols, as people, doing what people do in the circumstances they find themselves in, which is to make the best possible life out of the available materials, and to hold on to themselves quietly and persistently in the meantime. Beverly takes the elevator down at 5:15. She goes through the revolving door. She walks to the subway in the winter coming air. She is thinking about the Spain story from the New Yorker. She is thinking about Margaret's good. She is thinking, a little, about the letter. The city makes its sounds around her. The subway makes its sound. The apartment will be quiet when she gets home, and the African violet will be on the windowsill, and the cast iron skillet will be on the stove. She is wearing the navy coat and the white cotton gloves and the shoes that click on the pavement with a small steady sound. Click, click, click. The day is done, and another one will begin in the morning, and she will put on the stockings and the girdle and the navy skirt and the white blouse and the pearl brooch, and she will sit down at the typewriter, and her fingers will find the keys, and the sound of work being done will fill the room again. There is something beautiful in that, I think. Not in what was taken from these women, and things were taken, that is simply the truth of it, but in what they kept. The competence intact, the humour intact, the friendship intact, the ambition intact, the self carried carefully through everything the day required, and set down again gently at the end of it. The lamp is warm. The city is doing its quiet night thing. The African violet is very still on the windowsill, the small leaves slightly turned toward the light from the brick wall's reflection. Beverly is asleep, and somewhere in the building on Madison Avenue, on the 14th floor, the typewriters are covered for the night, and the clock's second hand is still making its small, precise tick in the dark, and the filing cabinets hold their contents with the patient stillness of things that are very good at waiting. Tomorrow is Thursday. Helen will be at the window table. Doris will bring her red dress back. The coffee will be on by 8:40. The Coldwell correspondence will be waiting in the pile, and somewhere in the mail, moving through the slow machinery of the postal system, a letter with careful handwriting is finding its way to the 14th floor of a different building, where it will sit in an inbox and wait and make itself quietly present. Whatever happens next is a different story. This one ends here, on a Wednesday night in October 1958, in an apartment in Murray Hill, with the sound of the city going on and on outside the window, the way it always does through everything. Beverly is in bed now. The roller at the back of her head has settled into a position that is not quite comfortable but is close enough, and she has learned not to notice it after the first few minutes. The satin pillowcase is cool and then warm. The cotton blanket and the thin wool blanket over it are the correct weight for October. Not the summer weight and not the winter weight, but exactly this, the in-between weight, the weight of the season itself. The city outside is very present. Not loud, not intrusive, but present, the low continuous texture of it, the way an ocean is present even when you are not looking at it, something you feel more than hear, a vibrational fact of the environment that you stop noticing only after years, and that you would notice immediately if it stopped. Beverly breathes. In the building above her, the television murmurs on for another 15 minutes and then goes quiet. Someone in the apartment across the airshaft turns a light off. The particular sound of the elevator, which she can hear faintly when the building is this quiet, the mechanical hum of it, the soft thud of the doors, moves twice and then is still. She is thinking slowly and without any urgency about the story in the New Yorker. The man in the Spanish village listening to music he did not understand. She found that detail exactly right. in the way that occasionally a detail in a story is exactly right, perfectly placed, doing more than its apparent work. Because the point was not that he did not understand the music, the point was that he found it beautiful anyway. The point was that some things do not require translation to reach you. She is not entirely sure what this has to do with anything, but she lets it sit. The October night outside is still. No rain, which she had thought there might be. The sky was that particular grey all day, but it has held off, and the air outside the window is very clear for city air. Clear enough that if she went and stood at the glass she could probably see a star or two above the buildings. She does not go to the glass. She stays where she is. The African violet is on the windowsill in the bathroom, very still in the dark. She is going to water it on Thursday morning. She noted this when she was in there earlier, and noted that she would need to remember it, and now she has remembered it, and has filed it away again, and can stop carrying it. There is a quality to this particular hour. 10 o'clock, 10:15, the drift between waking and the beginning of sleep, that Beverly finds difficult to describe, but that she associates with a very specific kind of freedom, the freedom of not being required to be anything in particular. Not the professional version, not the daughter or the friend or the woman on the subway or the woman who brought the coffee, just the particular amalgam that is Beverly herself, which she is aware is a harder thing to describe than any of the other versions, because the other versions have names and roles and the shape that roles give you, and this one is simply what remains when all of that is set aside. She thinks, in that half-idle way of almost sleep, a person who prefers the second half of books to the first, a person who is better at mornings than evenings but has learnt to make peace with evenings, a person who feels strongly about the cast iron skillet and mildly about most other possessions, a person who is good at waiting for things without quite stopping wanting them, which is perhaps the skill she values most in herself, and which she has never quite articulated until now, half asleep in the dark, with the wool blanket warming. She is a person who wrote a letter and put it in the mail. That is also true. And she can hold that quietly, in this room, in this October dark, without needing to know yet what it means. The city breathes on. The things that are very good about her life are very good. The apartment is hers. The African violet is alive. The Spanish story was excellent. Margaret will say something Thursday at dinner that will make her laugh so suddenly she will have to put her wine glass down, and she doesn't know this yet, but it will happen, and on some level that is also already true. Waiting for Thursday, the way Thursday is always already waiting, the way the future is always already there, patient and full of what it contains. She is drifting now, in the real sense, not the metaphorical one. The thoughts are beginning to lose their edges. The navy wool skirt is on the hanger. The stockings are drying over the towel bar. The girdle is away. The lipstick is in the bag on the shelf, and the bag is on the shelf, and the shelf is in the bedroom, and all of it is exactly where it is supposed to be, ready for Thursday, ready for the next day, the way good equipment is always ready. The typewriters on the 14th floor are under their covers. The Whitmore proposal is in the outbox. The letter is in the mail. Beverly closes her eyes and the city keeps going very steadily in the way that cities keep going, which is to say without reference to any particular person's sleep or waking, simply ongoing, the great persistent hum of millions of lives running simultaneously, each one complete in itself, each one containing a Wednesday in October, a person lying in the dark at 10:15 thinking about the things they want and the things they have and the distance between those things, which is never as large as it sometimes feels. Breathe in and out. The floor lamp is off. The African violet is asleep in its own quiet way. The satin pillowcase is very smooth. The second hand on the clock above the filing cabinets is still making its small, precise tick in the empty office on the 14th floor, alone in the dark with all the covered machines and the filed correspondence and the morning's coffee already waiting in the percolator to be made. The building is quiet. The city is breathing. The October night holds everything. Gently. Rest now. You have followed Beverly through a long day, and the day was not easy, and the rules were not fair, and she did it anyway, every day the way millions of women did it, with a thoroughness and a grace and a humour and a stubbornness that the history books rarely named, but that built the world you are lying in tonight. So rest. Let the sound of the city in the dark be the sound that carries you. Let the typewriter keys be still. Let the light through the window grow very soft now, very far away, the way October light does when the night is clear and the city is finally almost settled. Let the day close like a door closing, gently, with the particular sound of a latch catching, and then silence, and then the long quiet dark of a night well earned. The navy coat is on the hook. The letter is in the mail. Sleep well. You are in good company.